This is VHS Massacre 2. This cost $500 to make, and that was just like buying an external hard drive, some very limited travel money for a producer, and that's pretty much it. And that's how you get your $500. Everything else was people who volunteered to be in the film and collecting interviews. About a year of gathering interviews and about a year of editing and tweaking and still adding more, you know. I would actually say this is the film I'm most proud of in my career. It won the most awards, and it meant the most to me, and I felt like I had the clearest message. But anyway, anyone can do this. I'm not special. I'm good at working a little bit at a time over a long period of time. You know, the tortoise and the hare? I'm the tortoise, but I finish a lot of stuff. So you have to have that mentality. Just work on something, even if it's just a half hour a day, you know, because over the course of the week, that could add up to a lot. You know, maybe you're shooting these interviews over, you know, once a month even. That's fine, because in a year you'll have 12 interviews. I like doing some of the deep dive, you know, investigation of sort of the origin of exploitation film and things like that. You know, so that could be fun. So you definitely want to play to the strength of what you're into. I love Troma. The new Toxic Avenger movie's coming out, produced by Lloyd Kaufman and Michael Hertz and directed by Macon Blair. I'm excited for it, even though I'm not involved in it. But I've just been sort of making my documentaries around the Toxic Avenger and Troma for a number of years now. So I think it's going to be great. And also Joe Bob Briggs, which you've seen this documentary, his series got renewed. So he and John Brennan and all those people, Darcy the Mail Girl and all this stuff, you know, so they're doing really well. We only interviewed Joe Bob Briggs once, and for both documentaries. He didn't blow up at the last drive-in when this interview was conducted, but with VHS Massacre 2, we were able to we did ask him would he ever do a show, and there's this really kind of sweet answer at the end that he wasn't sure if he would ever have another TV show, and then we were able to show like his last drive-in special kind of shattered the internet. So it was cool because actually what happened was that video got around, and a lot of the fans, there's this thing called the Mutant Fam. If you're very lucky, when you make a film, it will keep having these resurgences. You know, if you're very lucky, it will have legs, and people will keep discovering it and picking it up. And that's actually what happened with VHS Massacre 2. About a month and a half ago, the New York Times did a Streaming Gems article, and it was praising VHS Massacre 1 and then VHS Massacre 2. Really, really positive stuff. And that was it's a weird culmination. So like in your career, you will have a lot of ups and downs. And this is a story I tell a lot, but let me do it one more time. The first 16mm feature I did was called Everything Moves Alone. The film got some decent reviews, and it managed to get a screening in the basement of this thing called the Pioneer Theater. And the New York Times reviewed it, and they called it unfortunate backwash. And at the time, I think I was 21 at the time, and it totally destroyed me. I wasn't prepared for that level of criticism, right? So you get weathered by this kind of stuff, and over the years you build up a skin, at least with that type of thing. I got in the New York Times a few more times for web video and stuff like that, but it really took until I was 46 years old for the New York Times to sort of recognize me as a real filmmaker. And since I was about 21 at the time, that's about 25 years. If you want to call that a success, the overnight success took 25 years. Ultimately has not transformed my life, by the way. James Richardson, he's a dear friend of mine, and he agreed to be in the docs, and he's just really good on camera. He's very interesting, and he knows his stuff, especially in regard to exploitation film. So you need someone like this, right? You need an expert. You gotta find your expert in whatever documentary you're trying to make. When I was making this film, I was under a tremendous amount of pressure. I was working on my MFA degree. I had a child on the way, and I was moving. In a weird way, I thought this was the last feature-length film I was ever going to direct. And actually, technically, as of right now, it is, although I've been producing a lot of stuff. Part of the documentary was really trying to articulate a way to demonstrate how these B-movies or trashy movies, exploitation movies, how they're important. I kind of knew that they were, probably because it was the counterculture. this concept of mainstream culture and then the underground films or the things that would antagonize mainstream culture. I remember showing some clips to another professor. They understood me showing Night of the Living Dead and saying that that's an important film. But when I showed The Toxic Avenger, they really didn't agree. And so I was trying to paint the picture that it's the overall movement that is important. And that's sort of like a Marshall McLuhan concept. He says the media is the message, meaning the individual shows are not that important. It's what the whole form of media does. That's the important thing, and that's what I took. I was saying that independent films and exploitation films, the overall net gain is clearly important. Most of it's bad, but a lot of the good ideas get carried into the mainstream, so it ends up being very important. So that was the sort of thesis. I remember I was doing my MFA, and some of the shorts I was making, I did a Kevin MacLeod documentary, and the professor was a really cool dude, was like, this is really funny. And I was like, well, yeah, funny is free, right? Funny is free. So if you can make a documentary with some humor in it, if you can make a horror movie with a little humor in it, that's exciting and that is interesting. And people always say, like, comedy is the hardest thing to do. I don't know if it's the hardest thing to do. As a matter of fact, I think making a feature-length drama film is probably harder than a comedy, because a bad drama is impossible to watch. Bad comedy is not good either. But as I always say, bad horror is fine, right? So that's why I think making a feature-length horror movie is also a good bet. Because whether it's a good horror movie or a bad horror movie, it's a very forgiving genre, very forgiving community. So Tom Poirier shot this stuff of the last blockbuster in Bend, Oregon, which was invaluable because we got to put this in and then have a clip at the end. So big thanks to Tom Poirier. So Tom Poirier was shooting on his phone, which I think it was 1080p footage. The film overall was 4K, so I had to try to upscale this stuff. Try to make it match as much as possible. I wouldn't say that it matches, but given that it's a documentary, you get away with some cell phone footage, and people understand. With doc, it doesn't have to be uniformly aesthetically perfect because they're understanding that I'm showing clips from old movies. I'm showing clips from movies that are like 7 years old, and then showing 4K clips, of Shakespeare's Shitstorm or something. So it has this sort of AV mishmash of aesthetic, and what you try to do as much as possible is clean it up as much as possible, color grade, degrain, or unless the grain is beautiful, then you leave it, or just remove, let's say, the worst, shakiest looking footage and really try to hone in. And I was surprised. I would say most of my entire career, people have essentially said that my films look amateur, but with these two documentaries, people really thought that aesthetically they were well done, especially the second one. I do think documentary is more forgiving in that way. With things like narrative horror, let's say, you really have to spend some time and post-production and color grade that stuff to really give it a style and to really transform it away from its digital origin. Because the real horror fan doesn't necessarily like super pristine, high-quality aesthetic. I mean, sometimes that can be used to a good effect. Midsummer that came out, the aesthetic was like pretty beautiful, high-key, but also it actually had this slightly blown-out look, which is very interesting, as if the sun was just too much, But it was bright and interesting and colorful and all that stuff. I would say from my perspective, I like the gritty stuff. Not all horror fans feel that way, So this is interesting. Joe Bob Briggs goes on to say that in the past, the New York Times did not always treat exploitation filmmakers in the best way. But then sometimes when they pass away, someone will write like an obituary of them, and it will be kind. And he's just saying it's hypocritical.